shall we check out some art? So we begin today's gallery viewing with some Space Marines. This time we have one of the best chapters, one of the worst chapters, and a random chapter. Can you guess which is which? The first of the trio is the one on the left, the Marine wearing black armour. This is an Iron Hand. The Iron Hands are unfortunate in that they are the dullest of all the Space Marine chapters, tied with the Iron Warriors. Maybe it's got something to do with iron, perhaps. Now, something I have noticed when looking at this Iron Hand is that the older Rogue Trader era logo for them, the hand looks better here than it does in their current 40k version. I think it's due to this one having a very spindly look. It's almost skeletal, isn't it? On the Marine's left leg is something rather interesting. There's a bloody rag tied around his leg. Why is this? Has he been shot and there's a hole in his armour, or is this some sort of trophy? I'm not sure. As per usual, in old Warhammer 40,000 art, all the Space Marines are wearing what we now refer to as Mark VI armour. When this art was produced, there was no Mark VII or Mark IV, etc. I think they all got designed just before the release of 2nd edition, but I may be wrong. The middle Marine is what is known as a Rainbow Warrior. This is what I think is a cool chapter, but sadly doesn't get any more love anymore. Even back in the day, they didn't seem to see much screen time, as it were. Just a few pieces of art and the odd random painted Marine here and there. Now, over the years, I've always tinkered with the idea of painting some Rainbow Warriors. I've painted a couple here and there, dipped my toe, as it were, but never really committed. Perhaps it's time that changed. Now, one person who is a big fan of the Rainbow Warriors is Louise over at Rogue Hobbies. I'm sure you all know who she is, and I'm sure you've seen her take on these guys. Now, there are lots of theories as to how the Rainbow Warriors were created. Some say they're based on the Greenpeace ship that was sunk by the French Navy back in the day. Some say they are pre-Death Strike Marines. Nobody knows for sure. I, however, think the chapter name or theme is based on Spectrum from Captain Scarlet. If you look at some of the art for these guys, they have names and are called Brother Vermilion or whatever, the 40k version of Captain Scarlet. I wonder if Brother Black ever went renegade. I do miss Captain Scarlet. I do think it was a good TV show, and I still want one of the Corgi Spectrum Pursuit vehicles. Those things were awesome. Our last chapter here on show are the Silver Skulls. Not a very common chapter these days. I believe current lore has them as Iron Warriors' successors, with Barbarous Dantioch being the inspiration for their logo. At least that's what I took away from my readings. You guys might have come up with something else. I can't say I've ever seen a Silver Skulls army on the tabletop, or saying that a Silver Skulls miniature in general. They must be rare indeed. Are they still around in the Codex art these days? Who knows? There are a couple of trophies attached to our Silver Skull, a man and an orc. To me, the orc looks really angry that he's been used as a trophy.
Get me off here, you filthy Yumi!
By the way, does anyone else find orc speak cringe? It's a little too childish for the setting, in my opinion. Now, we don't get enough dead Xenos sculpts on our Space Marine kits anymore, in my opinion. I want them to bring back all those extra little bits on the sprues, you know, like some skulls or arms or other body bits that we can use to dress up our bases. Here we have some art that really typifies Rogue Trader artwork. It looks a little strange, but it still looks really, really good. It's a fantastic style, and I do enjoy the black and white look. So this picture portrays a Space Marine, and I use that term lightly, shooting a punk of the generic variety. The shot might be non-lethal, as to me it looks like it's just water spraying out. Maybe it's a water pistol fight in the height of summer. The Marine chap on the left barely qualifies as a Marine. His armour looks like Mark 6, but it just looks wrong. A little uncanny valley, as it were. The shoulder pads are a weird shape. The hands or gloves look odd indeed, and the legs are huge. Oh, and he's lost his backpack. The Space Marine's helmet has a Geordie LaForge style wraparound visor, as opposed to your run-of-the-mill eye lenses you usually see on the Mark 6 helmet. Is this a modification, or is it a variant? Is it even a Mark 6 helmet? I'll leave that for you guys to decide. On the side of the punk's head, behind his eye, is what looks like some sort of weird growth. What is this? It reminds me of bone conduction headphones for running. Maybe it's some sort of Rogue Trader era cybernetics. Does it look like something from Cyberpunk 2077? I never did play that game. Is it worth a look? The wall in the background has that logo on it that we've seen in a lot of older Rogue Trader era artwork. Nobody has owned up to it yet, but if you know who or what this logo represents, then please let us all know. There were rumours of it being an 80s punk band. In our next wonderful piece, we have what I believe is an Ogryn shooting at an Eldar. It's possible it's not an Ogryn and just an Imperial Guardsman with a big head, but if I had to put money on it, I would go with an Ogryn. Also, amusingly, my autocorrect refuses to write Ogryn and keeps changing it to Organ. Anyway, amusingly to me, this Ogryn looks like a chap I used to work with. His name was Nev, short for Neville. He was really into his taxidermied animals. I've never met anyone else before or since that had that as a hobby. Anyway, a few of my viewers will know who I mean, and if you're watching, hello Nev. So I think the gun that Nev the Ogryn is holding is a Ripper gun. They look a lot bigger nowadays, but it still looks cool. I was always a big fan of the Ripper gun. Are they just big auto guns? What I have noticed is that Neville the Ogryn has a large belt buckle with a face on. Interestingly, these were all the rage for orcs of the era. If you have a look at the old orc art, and some miniatures I suppose, a lot of them have these big gurning faces on their belt buckles. Perhaps they shop at the same accessories store, or perhaps he murdered an orc and took it. The Eldar on the left, or should I say Eldari, has been shot in the stomach, I think. Although it must be a non-pain-inducing weapon, as he doesn't seem to be at all that bothered. I'm convinced getting shot in the guts would hurt, so I reckon something odd is going on here. What I find interesting is that the spaceship in the background, behind those Eldar, reminds me of the Blackburn Buccaneer, an old Navy plane. I used to see them a lot in my old aeroplane books as a youngster. I think it's the stubby nose cone. It wasn't a very pretty plane. Now, fun fact, when I was a lad, I really wanted to join the Royal Air Force. I had a fascination with aeroplanes. It didn't happen for a certain reason, which is a story for another day. But are any of you guys in the forces, or have you been in the forces? If so, what was it like? Right, the subject of our next piece of Rogue Trader art is this. At first glance, you would be forgiven for thinking it's an alien. And you would be right. However, it's not just any old alien. Do you know what sort of alien it is? Well, if you haven't already guessed, let me put you out of your misery. Yes, this is a Genestealer. Yep, you heard that right. It doesn't look much like the Genestealers of today that we all know and love, does it? This is known as an Umgal Genestealer, as it was first found on the planet or moon of Umgal. Umgal Genestealers today throw back to this look by giving them the mouth tendril things. The rest of the body looks totally different though. The new ones certainly don't have this weird bobbly belly and torso. What is that? It's actually pretty disgusting. Those weird tendril things on its face, tentacles or squid lips, whatever they are, remind me of Dr. Zoidberg from Futurama. A TV show I enjoyed, but never managed to catch on TV. I never knew which channel it was on or when. It was either BBC 2 or Channel 4. Can any of you guys remember? Now, the Genestealers of today have 2 big Talon-like hands and 2 more normal hands. Over the years, they have also gotten bigger, to a size I think is now sadly comical. I still feel 1st edition Genestealers look the best, and then 2nd, and so on. Anyway, this Genestealer has 4 of the same hands. You've got to hand it to him, really. I'll get my coat. So I would probably put money on this original Genestealer being inspired by the alien from Alien. I'm not sure if Aliens was out at the time of Rogue Trader's release. Were they both 1986, or was Aliens out in 1984? I never can remember. Anyway, H.R. Giger's Alien continues to inspire all the Tyranids to this day, and it's lovely. This is a really fun image, isn't it? So here we have some Space Marines in combat. In combat against unknown assailants. Would you like to hazard a guess as to whom they are fighting? Let us all know in the comments below. Now normally we would expect Space Marines to be toting bolters. However, these Space Marines are wielding something else. These are not bolters. They look a bit more like lasguns to me, with a big axe-style bayonet on the end. There appears to be one Marine there in the background with a bolter though. There's also a missile launcher, and interestingly it's being carried in a similar manner to the way they are carried by the Space Marines in Space Crusade. Just needs the little flames painted on the side. At the bottom left of the picture is a poor soul who looks like he may have either died during this battle or suffering from shock or something similar. He's staring at us in disbelief. At first I thought this was an orc, but I'm thinking it might be one of the Space Marines. I suppose the fact he's wearing Space Marine armour is a bit of a giveaway. Now the best bit about this piece of art are those weird robotic walker things in the background. They are very interesting. Are these proto-titans? Are these AI constructs? Whatever they are, they look fantastic. If I had to take a punt, I would probably say they were orc contraptions, going from that ramshackle style. However, the walkers of orcs today don't look anything like this, although I feel they should. Orc walkers these days are more barrel-like, a bit like me after my Christmas gorging. Now in my notes, I've stated you can't tell how many legs it has, but now after a second glance, I think this robot or walker is in fact bipedal. I can see 2 legs coming out either side of the hip area. The legs do have an amusing curve to them. There's no feet on show. We don't know if these legs culminate in feet or wheels or caterpillar tracks or something else. Now, whatever the hell that walker thing was, it's the sort of thing that I would like to see get scratch built. They would have done it back in the day. Maybe we should do it ourselves. What do you guys think? Okay, so I will now be taking bets. I need to know, is this an orc or a goblin? Or perhaps a Gretchen or even a snotling? I can't tell. I have to admit I don't really know the differences between the orc races, but I'm sure some of you guys out there do. So to me, this goblin geezer, this green lad, reminds me of the goblins that you see in Jim Henson's Labyrinth movie, famous for David Bowie's codpiece. When I was a boy, I actually found that movie quite scary. I haven't seen it in a while, so I should really go and rewatch it. Now, are any of you guys familiar with Andy the Knife? Well, if you know, you know. Andy used to belong to a guy I work with, who was also called Andy. We referred to him as Billy Bobbins. He was not a nice person, and he would spend most of his days trying to intimidate new people or offer people outside for fights. Well, this goblin reminds me of him. To be honest, he was a c***. Although we can't see much of this guy's weapon, from what we can see, I'm reminded of some sort of contemporary rifle, as opposed to the weird and wonderful weapons of Warhammer 40,000. Perhaps it's just an old auto gun. Would any of you guys like to hazard a guess? In my notes, I've written something about his fingers looking strange. However, you can't even see this guy's hands, let alone his fingers, so I don't know what I was talking about there. I mean, his fingers probably do look weird though. It's possible I was talking about that nub thing in the foreground, but I think that's just another helmet spike, isn't it? Now at first I thought the chap on the right was having his face melted off like Colonel Tot or whatever his name was in Raiders of the Lost Ark. However, I now see that's just some weird blurring of the picture on the right hand side. Now on a side note, I was terrified of the ghosts at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark as a kid. I suppose that was the intention though. It was a very good movie indeed. So when I first saw this thing, I was absolutely convinced I saw it in The Empire Strikes Back, the best of the Star Wars movies. It was some sort of medical droid. I think you pressed its head, the toy version, and all these little white spindles flicked out. Although it's possible I'm getting my Star Wars toys mixed up. Some of you might be wondering how I know it had the flip out parts. Well, I had this toy myself. I think I had it when I was around 8 or 9, but my memories of that time are very hazy. Everything sort of blends together. They were the days when Christmas still felt magical, you know? Now, as a kid, I got a lot of Star Wars figures from a car boot sale at Snetterton. I think it was Snetterton, but I don't actually know. I should probably ask my dear old mother to be sure. Anyway, there was always a big bin full of figures that were really cheap. I think my favourite was the Scout Trooper from Return of the Jedi. They were some good times, and I wish I could remember some more of them. Now this robot has an interesting wheel setup. I think it's basically a golf cart. Is that the name for those? The stick bags with wheels. A cart might actually be the little electric cars people drive about in. I don't know if any of our viewers are into golf, but I'm sure if any are, they will let us know and help us out with the correct terminology. Now looking at this robot, I begin to wonder just what the purpose of it might be. All those spindly grabby arms make me think it's more likely to be some sort of mechanical assistant droid than anything for battle. Maybe it holds things in place while they are welded, like a 40k version of a workmate. Remember when they were all the rage in the late 80s? I'm getting to the age where I fancy getting one for myself. Now I'm not sure why it is, but I always enjoy seeing designs that are a little strange, a little out there, odd things. I suppose it's because they look a little more original, less generic than the usual things. I'm sure a psychologist could tell you why. I'd like to have some sort of robot kit that was full of all sorts of random bits and bobs that you could just put together any way you like. Pick and mix style. Various different wheels, various different arms, various different heads. Put it all together with the bits that you think would make something cool. I bet something like that already exists in Japan. Now, didn't we see this guy earlier in the video? This one appears to be in a different pose though. In this case, dead. He probably died of boredom waiting for me to decide if he was an orc or Gretchen or whatever. Did we ever decide? So this goblin actually looks a lot like the previous goblin from earlier in the video. The one we said looks like Billy Bobbins. Is it the same guy? Perhaps, although all goblins do look the same. Are goblins clones, by the way? Now this goblin appears to be getting shot by a space marine. We can see a bolter firing in that area. However, there appears to be no physical wound as yet, so either the artist didn't want to draw it, or we've caught a moment in time where the bolter has been fired, but the bolt has not yet left the barrel. A well-timed photograph indeed. There are a lot of weird pipes and cable-looking things around the orc's body. It looks a little bit like the orcs have been nested up by aliens for a facehugger, but I guess he could have fallen into a pile of pipes or something. At the end of one of those pipes or cables around his neck, near his chest, is what appears to be a microphone. Is this orc vlogging during his battles? Is he filming videos for OrcTube? I think orc videos would be rather entertaining, probably a bit like Jackass, and is that still a thing? I suppose it's possible he works for some sort of orc media company, reporting from the front lines to the orcs back home. You can imagine all the little orcs gathered around the TV cheering them on. our baby orcs called snotlings. Here we can see a couple of men. One of the men is being cradled by the other. I think he's trying to help him. He's not the happiest looking person, is he? He looks rather upset, you might say, rather worried. We saw the same look on many hobbyists' faces when they saw the queue to get on the Warhammer website, I think. He has some weird looking strands coming out of his head. Are these hairs growing at an alarming rate? Is he upset because he wanted to stay bald and some sort of magic or biological weapon is causing him to grow hair? The way the gentleman looks either upset and in pain with that straggly hair coming out reminds me a bit of the scene at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when General Veers drinks from the fake Holy Grail and ages rapidly to his death. Another scary scene for some youngsters, but a good one. The chap cradling him, I think it might be a space marine, appears to be trying to offer our aging man something. To me, it looks a little like a chocolate bar, a little like a penguin or a Snickers. Is our raging man just hangry? Is this just one of those Snicker adverts we see on TV these days? Now here's a dilemma I feel you guys will be able to help with. The cradler, not the cradlee, has either a helmet with a vision slit or a mechanical beaky mouth, like when you used to get a pair of coconuts to make a monkey mouth at school. The vision slit makes more sense, but it's far more amusing seeing it as a mouth. It looks a little like Pac-Man. Now speaking of Pac-Man, I once read, and I don't know if this is true, that he was originally going to be called Puck-Man, named after a hockey puck. But the powers that be at the time, in Namco I believe, were worried that people would deface the cabinet and change the word Puck-Man to F***Man. I mean, Puck-Man does make sense looking at him. Talking of making sense, if you're enjoying this video, then please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. That means you, Pac-Man. And remember, Mrs. Snakeworks has said when we hit 10,000 subscribers, we're allowed to order a Warhound Titan. So please smash that subscribe button and we can hit that target ASAP. If you are enjoying the content on the channel, then please consider joining us on Patreon, the link to which is in the description below, or up here somewhere. Or you could become a channel member, which is much more popular these days. Again, there's a link in the description below. Ziggetta really sang, screwed up eyes and screwed down hairdo, like a punk from 40k. Here we have Ziggetta Stardust. Well, that's what I'm going to call her, as she reminds me a lot of Ziggy Stardust, who, as we all know, is David Bowie, just with a bit of makeup on. I think it was supposed to be one of his alter egos or another persona of his, or have I misremembered? Either way, he was great. We do miss David Bowie here, and I'm surprised we managed to reference him so much. Whoever this young lady is, she does look a little like your typical 90s Marvel superhero. The sort of character you might see on that old X-Men cartoon that everyone raves about. I've never seen it myself, but I have heard it's actually very good. I think it got a new season or a reboot or something on Disney Plus called X-Men 97. Now when I first set eyes upon this picture, my brain told me this lady had a massive head of hair, a huge bouffant, but in closer inspection I can see it's not the case. It's just a mohawk of sorts with what appears to be a pair of curtains behind her. I think they call this an illusion. That was an 80s song, so I like, but I forget the name of the band though. Amusingly, this lady's belly button appears to be closed like an eye. Is it an actual eye? Is this young lady a mutant? I've heard of navigators having a third eye in their forehead, but not one in the navel, and that's novel. The outfit's also built in a way for it to be exposed, which makes me think it is an eye. It's also the sort of thing I expect Miley Cyrus or Lady Gaga to wear at some sort of awards ceremony. Attached to our subject's thigh is what I think is a knife in a scabbard, so I would assume this is a rough part of town. Also, the scabbard has what appears to be a little wreath motif, which looks like something you might see on a Space Marine, which is nice. Our subject here is also wearing a pair of fishnet tights or stockings. I can't say I know what the difference between them is. Fishnets were rather popular back in the 80s and don't seem to get as much exposure nowadays. I can't say I've seen a pair in the flesh for a good while now. Are they still considered fashionable? Some wonderful artwork there. If you want to see some more Oldhammer artwork, then check out the playlist up here somewhere. And as always, thank you very much for watching.